prairies. A land of plenty, blessed with good lands and fertile soils. Yet in the mid-1800s, much of this land had been condemned by Colonel Palliser, dismissed as being totally unsuitable for productive farming. Because of the acute lack of moisture and the unfortunate combination of drought and high winds, he knew firsthand how very dry the region could be, harsh and inhospitable. Yet by the end of the century, settlers had begun to arrive in numbers, bringing with them the farming methods of their homelands in Europe and the United States. Soon after their arrival, the practice of summer fallowing became the accepted method of conserving moisture for the next year's crop. However, this soon proved to be a serious mistake, almost a fatal one. In combination with very dry summers, high winds and low prices, vast tracts of land were so seriously eroded that the area and the period became known as the Dust Bowl. It was estimated in 1934 soil erosion was out of control on millions of acres. After a particularly savage drought, the winds started blowing, the soil started moving. Clouds of prairie dust cloaked cities in southern Ontario and even reached the New England states. Grim reminders of the devastating wind erosion of that time can still be found. In heavily eroded fields, blowholes deep enough to hide a truck can be found. Soil drifting became so severe that it buried fences, and new ones were built on top. 2- and 3-tier fences can still be seen. The roadside special area signs are another reminder of the protection some badly eroded land still requires. Much previously cultivated land has been ceded back to grass and used only as rangeland. It's a long way back from devastation on the scale of the dirty 30s, but bold and imaginative soil scientists, together with farmers, have gradually developed successful management practices to minimize a reoccurrence. For example, strip cropping to inhibit soil movement, field shelter belts to impede blowing and cut down the wind's velocity, and machinery that destroys weeds while at the same time provides the protective cover of crop residues. Yet for all of these new developments, many of us too easily forget or ignore the lessons of the past, even after just a few generations. In the early decades of this century, 2 remarkable men, Charles Noble and Asa Palmer, set out to declare war on soil erosion, particularly the tradition of black summer fallowing, which they saw, quite correctly, as a major cause of soil erosion. Both agreed that excessively tilling summer fallow to destroy weeds destroyed the protective cover and thus left the soil vulnerable to erosion. Charles Noble was a farmer in southern Alberta near the town that still bears his name, Nobleford. He was an entrepreneur, an inveterate tinkerer, but most important, a tireless innovator. In concert with Asa Palmer, a soil scientist at the Lethbridge Research Station, Noble set out to develop a tillage implement that would kill weeds and at the same time leave the crop residue on the surface to protect the soil. Dr. Palmer recalls,
the summer fallow was one of the chief problems, but it wasn't a mistake. It was a necessity, and it was a matter of learning how to summer fallow. If they were going to conserve their moisture, they had to prevent any plant growth. And the way to prevent any plant growth was to cultivate the land frequently enough to kill any plants, weeds, or volunteer grain before it got up high enough to use much moisture. And so it meant frequent cultivation.
Dr. Palmer was such a vigorous advocate of maintaining a crop residue cover to protect the soil that he earned the nickname Trash Cover Palmer, a handle he still holds proudly. One result of the persistent efforts of Noble and Palmer was, of course, the Noble blade. The original straight blade was later modified into the lower draft V-shaped model, still in use today. Let's take a closer look at wind erosion. What do we really mean by it? Most erosion begins at a focal point in the field. It could be an exposed knoll or even pulverized soil in tire tracks. We usually visualize it as a huge black cloud of dust in the sky, but there are, in fact, three major mechanisms involved. Suspension is seen as the cloud of dust, although the most obvious, it accounts for less than 15% of the soil loss. But these fine particles, clay and organic matter, may move great distances. Saltation is the most destructive of the processes and accounts for 50 to 75% of the soil loss. Small particles are lifted up to 4 feet in the air and then leapfrog down on other particles, breaking them up, sending them flying in the air. Eroded land actually looks sandblasted. The third process, surface creep, is seldom obvious, but may account for 10 to 25% of the soil loss. Soil particles literally roll along the soil surface. All of these erosional processes cause soil particles to break down, separating the fine clays and organic matters from the coarser silt and sands. The finest particles move furthest, and the coarser particles stay behind, or at least move the least. This means that replacing drift piles from the ditch or fence line does not replace the original soil quality. The fine particles, usually the most fertile, have been blown away by the wind. A once eroded field becomes more vulnerable to further erosion. The crops it can grow will be poorer and yield less residue for soil cover, less organic matter to hold the soil particles together, and hence, inevitably, more erosion. But how much erosion can our soils tolerate? Dr. Wayne Lindwall, soil scientist at the Agriculture Canada Research Station in Lethbridge, shares some of his experience and research findings with us.
We've generally suggested to farmers that if they can see the topsoil loss visually, then it's exceeding the tolerable limit of 4 to 5 times is what we've suggested. Obviously, if it becomes excessive, it's much more serious. And to put things in perspective, our best summer fallow practices on the prairies, we've generally suggested that we're losing 4 to 5 tons per acre with our best summer fallow practices. What that really means is that for every bushel of wheat we're producing on summer fallow land, we're losing 3 to 4 bushels of soil. That's at the tolerable limit. So any excessive soil erosion, the losses are much greater. Some of our long-term research at Lethbridge has demonstrated that it takes 25 years to restore the productivity of a soil where we've lost 4 or 5 inches of topsoil. That's many years of intensive cropping and excessive fertilization. What that really means is that it's more than nutrients that we lose with soil loss. It's a structural component, it's an organic component. Obviously, the cure of soil degradation is much more expensive and much more time-consuming than preventing soil erosion.
It is generally agreed among soil scientists that summer fallowing, while it may conserve some moisture, control weeds, and increase fertility in the short term, in the long run, it is ruining the land. To be sure, organic matter is decomposed and nitrogen is released, and that's good for now. But eventually, the soil will lose its fertility and its tilth. In effect, we are mining the soil. The organic matter left by the root and straw of cereal crops does more than provide nutrients. It acts as a kind of cement which binds the soil together in what are called stable soil aggregates. Stable soil aggregates improve the seedbed tilth and reduce erosion. Sandy and clay soils are the most susceptible to erosion. However, given the right or wrong conditions, that is, right for the wind, wrong for the land, almost any soil will blow. We don't need a gale for soil to drift. Even a gentle wind can have that threshold velocity needed to start soil moving in more erodible soils. But there's more to the erosion problem than the soil itself. The way we farm the land bears greatly on its erodibility. Historically, and even today, the practice of summer fallowing, particularly overworking summer fallowing, causes the majority of the damage by wind erosion. Today, machinery presents an opportunity to do an even better job of conservation farming. Unfortunately, because of this new scale of technology, we perhaps unwittingly pulverize the soil by working fields too quickly or too often. We prefer the convenience of large fields with longer passes and fewer interruptions. So does the wind. We need to be constantly reminded of the failings of the past. Some younger farmers are aware of it.
The last few years has been, I'd say, quite serious for erosion in different areas, of course. I would say a lot of it's mismanagement over summer fallowing. We've had a few years of heavier winds than normal, but it's mainly, I would say, not enough trash cover.
Young farmer Laszlo remembers his childhood well.
Reminds me of guys I've spoke to, older farmers that talk about, over tillage makes it pulverized and it starts to blow. Dad always used to tell us when we were kids when you're out there summer fall and you're out there doing the job, you're not out there listening to the radio and daydream. Look at the soil. If it looks like there's not much trash or if it's going to blow, lift the cultivator out of the ground. You're better off to have a few weeds than to have no soil because you're not going to grow anything on it.
Let's get back to the way we farm. For example, weed control is important, but how it's done can influence erosion. Incorporating pre-emergent herbicides can lead to over-cultivation, which pulverizes the soil, leaving it open to serious erosion. Herbicides applied after the crop is up may be the best choice because they don't require any additional cultivation. When fall fertilizing is necessary, soil conservation must be kept in mind. Preparation for fall fertilizing can involve repeated cultivation that will bury protective crop residue. When fall fertilization is desirable, a conservation approach should be used. Prevention of wind erosion, a problem which won't blow away, is best started in the fall. Conservation begins at harvest time with keeping your stubble up. Maintaining a good crop residue cover is the simplest and best way to protect the soil. Crop residues provide an important source of soil organic matter. Spreading the straw as evenly as possible will minimize any problems with later tillage operations. Another tradition which is wrong is burning off the stubble. It is, quite simply, the worst thing you can do. Standing stubble presents the very best protection. Stubble traps snow, too, moisture for the next crop. Snow trapping can be enhanced by using various swather attachments that vary the stubble height. If tillage is necessary in the fall, it should be done by a technique that provides maximum crop residue on the surface. Examples: a wide blade cultivator will kill weeds, maintaining at least 85% of the residue cover with each operation. A heavy-duty cultivator is also quite effective, conserving about 80% of the residue on the surface. Disking will leave only 50% of the residue on the surface after each operation and may pulverize the soil as well. A plow will bury virtually all of the residue. Although plows and rototillers are widely used in irrigation farming, the pulverized soil is left completely exposed to the wind and inevitable erosion. Obviously, the erosion preventive advantages of heavy crop residue cover may present problems with seeding in the spring. Let's look at the conventional seed drill technology. A high-clearance hoe drill can seed through heavy crop residue better than most other drills. The double disc drill is also effective, although best on fields with less residue cover. The one-way, or discer, seeds well on heavy soil, but may turn under the residue needed for protection during germination and early growth. Also, new machinery is being developed which can do a better job of seeding directly into stubble. There are other techniques available to help control erosion. Strip farming. Field shelter belts, the sensible use of herbicides, and non-damaging fall fertilizing. Let's begin with strip farming. It is important that the strips be at right angles to the prevailing wind. On more erodible soils, strips should be narrower to be effective. This may be inconvenient, but it will save the soil. In this field, the erosion damage was serious, but the strip of standing stubble on the left trapped soil from the summer fallow to the right, which would otherwise have been blown off the field. Field shelter belts are useful. Their presence reduces wind velocity for a distance up to 10 times their height. In this particular field, near Drumheller, both narrow strips and shelter belts are needed to prevent serious erosion. When talking about wind erosion, an ounce of prevention is always to be desired. But sometime or other, that pound of cure may have to be used. However carefully the erosion controls are planned, emergencies will occur. The best rule to follow is simply do anything to diminish the wind velocity. Roughening the soil by bringing up less erodible clods to the surface. Lister shovels are a good implement for this, but any cultivator can be used. Construction equipment may be best in severe situations, if available. This may appear drastic, but it will trap moving soil which otherwise would be lost. If water is available, irrigation can be a help when erosion occurs. Straw bales and spreading manure can be particularly effective where the drifting starts on the focal points. This kind of instant fix should be avoided. The facts are simple. Soil conservation begins with good soil management. However it's done, keep the soil protected, whether by strips, shelter belts, straw spreading, continuous cropping, minimum tillage, fertilizers without tillage, whatever. Cover up where the wind can't get at you. This Earth isn't the eternal planet we once believed it to be. It needs care, our care. Are we just enjoying the inheritance from our fathers? Or are we mortgaging the future of our children? Future generations will have troubles enough. Will we let them be gone with the wind, too?